We are going to be focusing today on Zora Neale Hurston's very popular How It Feels to Be a Colored Me. This is going to be an adapted version of this essay, but there is some background information that I want you to be aware of before we get into the essay. Growing up in Eatonville, Florida, Zora Neale Hurston was sheltered from the unfair treatment that shaped the lives of many African Americans. So where she lived, she did not get to fully experience what many African Americans were experiencing. She ended up moving to New York City, into the Harlem neighborhood, just like the Harlem Renaissance movement that we've been talking about. This is where she grew inspiration. She wrote this essay in 1928 when African Americans were often referred to as colored. So you'll see that throughout. Obviously, it's the title, or you see it in the title of this essay, but that just gives it some context as well. We're going to do a quick write activity next. Zora Neale Hurston was not afraid to stand out in a crowd. You're going to think of some things that make you unique. So your style, your sense of humor, your interests, and you're going to respond to the following questions. To find me in a crowd, look or listen for. Most people in school would describe me as. And the thing that I do that is the most me is. We are going to talk next about rhetorical techniques. This is something that authors use to emphasize and link ideas together in a lively way. So in Hurston's essay, she uses two very specific rhetorical techniques to discuss her view about race. So the first one we're going to talk about is repetition. This is just repeating the same sound, word, phrase, or line for emphasis or to kind of like link ideas together. So she says in the essay, I am colored. I remember the very day I became colored. You see the repetition of the word colored here. Why does she do this? She does this because every time she repeats the word or emphasizes the word colored, the idea that the word is a label becomes more prevalent in her writing. So she uses the word colored to describe who she is, maybe not just through her own identity, or maybe it's through other people and how they view her or how they label her. The next rhetorical technique we're going to talk about is parallel structure. This is just the use of similar grammatical constructions to express ideas that are related or of equal importance. So in the story, or in the essay, she says, the terrible struggle said, on the line. The reconstruction said, get set. And the generation before said, go. So this is an example of parallel structure, and it has a very specific use. It allows so in this specific examples, you see the building blocks as a step in the race toward African American freedom. So it's all related to the step that came before it. So the first step, she said, is the struggle when they're on the line. The reconstruction, so the next step said, get set. And then the generation before said, go. She's showing you each step of this, and she's using a common phrase, on the line, get set, go, to show how each one of these generations was able to focus on African American freedom. How it feels to be colored me. I'm colored, but I offer nothing in the way of excuses. I am the only Negro in the United States whose grandfather on the mother's side was not an Indian chief. So all she's saying here is that she doesn't feel the need to reject her African American roots or identity and try to claim to be Native American ancestry. I remember the very day that I became colored. Until I was 13, I lived in this little Negro town of Eatonville, Florida. It is exclusively a colored town. The only white people I knew passed through the town going to or coming from Orlando. The white natives rode dusty horses, and the northern tourists drove automobiles. The town knew the Southerners and was uninterested in them, but the Northerners were something else. The timid peered at them from behind curtains. The more adventurous would come out on the porch to watch them go past. They got as much pleasure out of the tourists as the tourists got out of the village. The porch wasn't close enough for me. I wanted the best view, so I watched them from on top of my gatepost. Not only did I enjoy the show, but I didn't mind the actors knowing that I liked it. I actually spoke to them in passing. I'd wave at them, and when they returned my greeting, I would probably go little way with them. If one of my family happened to come up front in time to see me, they rudely broke off into the conversation. During this time period, white people differed from colored to me, only in that they rode through town and never lived there. They liked to hear me recite speeches and sing and dance, and they paid me money for doing these things. This seems strange to me, for I wanted to do them so much that I needed to be paid to stop. Only they didn't know it. The colored people gave me no dimes. They disapproved of any joyful tendencies in me, but I was their Zora nevertheless. I belonged to them, to the nearby hotels, and so to the country. I was everybody's Zora. So Zora's just describing her time being a child and living in this entirely black area. And whenever white people came by, she would sing and dance and perform, recite speeches, because that's who Zora was. Zora enjoyed doing this. And she never really thought much about what she did or the people that came through. But changes came in the family when I was 13, and I was sent to school in Jacksonville. I left Eatonville as Zora. When I got off the riverboat at Jacksonville, she was no more. It seemed that I had completely changed. I was not Zora of Orange County anymore. I was now a little colored girl. I found it out in a certain way. In my heart, as well as in the mirror, I became an unfading brown. But I'm not tragically colored. There's no great sorrow in my soul, and I don't mind at all. I do not belong to those who believe that nature somehow has given them a low-down, dirty deal, and whose feelings are all hurt about it. The world goes to the strong, regardless of a little color. No, I do not weep at the world. I'm too busy sharpening my oyster knife. So this whole oyster knife reference at the bottom is just, it kind of goes with the saying, the world is my oyster. She's kind of saying, hey, I'm too busy getting ready to face the world and be amazing. Someone is always reminding me that I'm the granddaughter of slaves. It fails to depress me. Slavery is 60 years in the past. The operation was successful, and the patient is doing well, thank you. The terrible struggle that made me an American out of a possible slave said, on the line. The Reconstruction said, get set. And the generation before said, go. I am off to a flying start, and I must not stop to look behind and weep. Slavery is the price I paid for civilization, and the choice was not with me. No one on earth ever had a greater chance for glory. It is thrilling to know that whatever I do, I shall get twice as much praise or twice as much blame. I stand at the center of the national stage. So this is her first experience leaving her town of all black people, and now she's entering a world where people identify her as a colored girl, where before she was just a girl who liked to perform and liked to do these things. But she's saying now that she realizes that racism is a thing, she doesn't care. She's not going to let those things hold her back. Just because her ancestors were slaves doesn't mean that she can't do great things. She's saying that's in the past, and the people that have endured all of that are here to, go through that. They've already went through it. They're there now cheering you on, saying you can keep going higher and doing better things. The position of my white neighbor is much more difficult. No brown specter haunts me. The game of keeping what one has is never as exciting as the game of getting it. I do not always feel colored. Even now, I often feel that I am the Zora I was before I left Eatonville. I feel most colored when I'm thrown against a sharp white background. For instance, at Barnard, I feel my race. Among 1,000 white persons, I am a dark rock overswept by a creamy sea. Through it all, I remain myself. When the waves pull away, I am revealed again. Sometimes it's the other way around. A white person appears among us, but the contrast is just as sharp for me. For instance, when I sit in the New World Cabaret with a white person, my color comes. We're chatting about any little nothing that we have in common. And then the jazz orchestra suddenly starts playing fiercely until it breaks through to the jungle beyond. I feel them exultingly. I dance wildly inside myself. I yell within. I whoop. I'm in the jungle. My face is painted red and yellow. My body is painted blue. My pulse is throbbing like a war drum. I want to slaughter something, but the piece ends. The men of the orchestra rest their fingers. I creep back slowly to civilization and find the white friend sitting motionless in his seat, smoking calmly. Good music they have here, he remarks. Music? The emotion has not touched him. He has only heard what I felt. He is far away, and I see him but dimly across the ocean. and the continent that have fallen between us. He is so pale with his whiteness then, and I am so colored. So she's saying, she's comparing two separate experiences here of, what it's like to interact with white people. And this is just an example of her, like a club, listening to music and listening to jazz. And she's very aware of her coloredness, as she calls it, when she's sitting there talking to a white person. You can see in their interaction that they felt two very, very different experiences, and it's hard for her to relate. At certain times, I have no race. I am me. And when I set my hat at a certain angle and walk proudly down 7th Avenue, Harlem City, I am a match for any fashionable lady strolling along in Paris. The cosmic Zora emerges. I belong to no race nor time. I am the eternal feminine. Sometimes I feel discouraged against, but it does not make me angry. It merely astonishes me. How can anyone deny themselves the pleasure of my company? It's beyond me. But mainly, I feel like a brown bag of miscellany, propped against a wall with other bags, white, red, and yellow. Pour out the contents, and there's a jumble of small things, priceless and worthless. A real diamond, an empty spool, a rusty knife blade, old shoes saved for a road that never was and never will be, a dried flower or two, and in your hand is the brown bag. On the ground before you is the jumble it held. You could empty the jumble in any of the bags into a single heap and refill them without changing the content of any of the bags much at all. A bit of colored glass more or less would not matter. Perhaps that is how the great stuffer of bags filled them in the first place. Who knows? So you see here, she is saying that she doesn't really let discrimination get her down. She doesn't get angry about it. She's so proud of who she is. And she kind of looks at everybody as being these little bags that all have different colors on the outside, and they're all stuffed with awesome things, quirky things, things that make us who we are, and that her race shouldn't play any part in that. At the end of the day, she kind of thinks that people are all kind of innately the same. So to wrap things up, I want you to consider a final thought. Do you think that your personality has been shaped more by traits you've inherited or by experiences that you've personally had?